Now, the story behind this is my dad and myself in his field of daisies. George, is this? Okay. I was not a happy baby. My mother said she prayed 5 years. She and Dad were married for 5 years before I was born, and she says, I prayed 5 years for a baby. She said, then I was afraid to pray for another one. I screamed, literally screamed 2.5 years. Just screamed. Mom would get an opportunity to go on meetings with Dad. They'd try to go in someplace to eat. Dad would walk me up and down the street while Mom would eat, and then Mom would walk me while Dad would eat, and I'd be screaming the whole time for no reason. I'll tell you how bad I screamed. When I was 2 years old, I fell off some steps at a neighbor's house. And about 3 days later, and I screamed, okay? 3 days later, Mother pulled my little undershirt up pulled it off of me, over my head, and I passed out. Took me to the doctor. I had a broken arm. But I screamed so much anyway, they didn't even know my arm was broken. I just screamed all the time. So one day, Mom and Dad and myself, we were in the car, driving to a meeting. And I was sitting on Mom's lap, screaming. And all of a sudden, Dad pulled over, and he said to Mother, give her to me. And he took me, he walked out in the middle of the field, and Mother was watching him. She says, he held me up. She saw him hold me up. She was terrified, had no idea what was going to happen. And she said that she had felt the anointing in the car, when he had pulled over. And he held me up, he prayed for me, and he said, Satan, I know this is you on this child trying to get at me in my ministry. Come out of her. And the demon left me. And he even said on tape after that, he said she was the calmest of all my kids. And this is probably about a year later. We were driving along that same road. We drove by the field. It was filled with daisies. And Dad got out and had Mom take her picture. He says, as a memorial that she'll have later on. So this is where the demon was cast out. Of course, I used to use that a lot with my brothers and my sister. After all, the demon was cast out of me, but they still had theirs. This is me and my jammies standing out in front, and I'll tell you what day this was. This was the day the possum was healed. Now, that possum, when it came into the yard, I was so shocked at where she went. She came down the driveway, went up into the yard, across the stepping stones, and went right over there in the corner of that porch and laid down behind that tall tree. Now that was my spot. I could not believe she'd gone to my spot. This is where I would hide from my mother. There was a little indentation there where I used to sit there and read. I always loved to read, and I would sit there and hide and read. And so many times my mom, bless her heart, she would come stand on that rail and yell, Rebekah! And I would just sit real still down there. She never looked down, she never saw me. And that was my spot. I had it all hollowed out exactly right for me. And that possum went over and laid down right there. And when she laid down, all these little babies came tumbling out. And I tried to get close to her. I tried hanging over the rail looking at her. Oh, she looked so pitiful. And all these little babies didn't even have hair on them yet. Just pitiful little things. I don't even know how many of them there were. And I ran downstairs, and I remember finding the lid of a mayonnaise jar. Because she was laying on her side. I thought, she can't lift her head, she can't get up to drink. So I got the lid on that mayonnaise jar, come out, filled it there at that faucet, and took a stick and scooted it over where it was right under her nose. And then once they had determined she didn't have rabies, I actually went and laid down kind of on the other side of the bush so that I could lay my head down at her level and try to get some sort of response out of her. But there was no response. And I know all day, all afternoon I worried about her, and man, I even got up in the night worrying about her. And the next morning, right as I came out the door, Dad was down there praying for her. And I walked over to the railing and scooted down and watched him and listened to him as he prayed for her. When he finished, I stood up and he stood up and that possum stood up and just walked straight across the yard, straight back out the driveway. And I came down and stood by Dad and we were both crying. We were both crying. And he told me, stand right here. Stand here just for a minute. And he ran in the house and got his camera and came out and took this picture. And he said, you remember this day and what the Lord has done for this animal. And you remember how much more he wants to do good things for you. And that's what Venus was. Possum picture. Every fall, in October usually, the last of October, a strange little ritual would take place in our backyard. The swings would come down and the deer would go up. Dad would go to Colorado hunting, and I tell you what, it gathered kids from all over the neighborhood. Everybody came to see this, because this didn't happen in anybody else's yard except ours. And the kids, they just thought, all the neighborhood kids thought Brother Branham was absolutely, Reverend Branham they called him, he was the star. He was their hero. Because the strangest things would take place around our house. This is Brother Banks Woods, actually. He was our neighbor. He's skinning the deer there. Dad would do such things for them as he would walk them home when they were in trouble. They would come and say, when they knew they were in trouble, they'd come and say, Reverend Branham, would you please walk me home? And he'd walk them home, and he'd tell their mommies, now, they're sorry. I know they're really sorry, and they're repentant. I'm sure this will never happen again. We would talk them out of a whipping. And whenever one of the animals died, we had a little cemetery set aside, and he would have a little funeral service for all of the fallen pets. And this was made him the hero in our neighborhood. We had a lot of visitors. This visitor, Dad talked about on tape, his name was Jeff Jeffers, and he owned the ranch in Colorado where Dad used to go and hunt and where he used to drive cattle on that ranch. So sometimes it was people that we didn't know, sometimes it was that little narrow driveway though, that's where the cars would line up. Actually that vehicle there was one of Dad's first vehicles that he used to take on the campaigns. It was an old, I think they called it a carry-on. They would be sleeping on those steps and lined up in that driveway. Other times, this is inside our house, one of the few pictures that I have of the inside of our house, actually, a few slides, that come to have Dad and Marion there in the living room. And as a matter of fact, that's Leo Mercer, who used yeah, no, that's not Gene, it's just Leo getting married. This is my mother in her most well-known pose here, hanging out clothes. She was absolutely the most immaculate housekeeper that I've ever met. She was very orderly, kept things totally in order. It was almost as though it was a part of her ministry here, was to keep order in our home. And when Dad was gone, no matter how long he was gone, when he came home, he never came home to chaos. He always came home, things were always the same at home. And I think that this was very, very important. And Mother kept things in perfect order all the time. Even when we were on vacation, she would have to wash clothes. This is up in Colorado where we would go sometimes in the summertime, and she's hanging clothes out of the hitching post. I like this picture of Mom and Dad. Mom did not get to travel very much in the meetings with Dad. This is one time she went with him to California, and this was taken there, and I believe it was in 1957. And she really was a very, very special lady.